So, let's give them a few moments. Oh, so hi everyone. Welcome. So long. We're going to give it a few more minutes for everyone to join. And in the meantime, please switch on your cameras so we can see your faces. And like Carolyn asked, please tell us where you're from. I see we have Patrice from sunny Pretoria. So I'm also from sunny Pretoria, and I'm so grateful for spring on the loom. So tired of winter. Oh, yeah. So Perrin, on your side, it's autumn, well, soon. Or is it still high season? You've had a serious heat wave.
A beautiful British summer in Guernsey. Yeah, so 26 or 27 degrees, I think, tomorrow. So yeah, we're still enjoying a lovely summer. Thank you, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have Con from Midstream, almost summer. Yes, I'm with you, Con. And then Malaysia, and also from London, enjoying summer still. Ben, hi. Bedding, greetings. Ntombi, where are you from? You must tell us. Lithuania, wonderful. Welcome. Copenhagen. I'm sure you're also still enjoying a beautiful green summer. And then Adrian from Dallas, Texas. I wonder what time is it there now?
Goodness me, yeah. Look at that. Athens, look, Athens. Wow. Hello, George.
And Advocate Selibalo from Lesotho. So you're also still in winter on your side. And Joburg. Bird from Joburg as well. Okay,
and Gary's visiting the UK.
Yeah, hi Gary.
Enjoying summer. And I know in Lesotho, we're about to send some snow up to Lesotho from Cape Town here. So Lesotho is going to get really cold just now in the next couple of days. But anyway, would you like to start, Mindy?
Yes. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to this very exciting event from Go Steer on the interconnectedness between governance and culture, which Perrin will tell us much more just now. So just by way of introduction, we have our Good Governance Research Forum and Academy CEO, Carolyn, with us. So what a privilege. Thank you for joining us, Carolyn. And then our man of the moment, Perrin Carey from the UK. He's the CEO of Steerco. So Go Steer, apologies, Perrin. So basically what they do is they use human data for an evidence-based scientific measurement of governance performance. So Perrin, if I'm correct, you graduated with a postgrad qualification in corporate governance from Bournemouth University in the UK. And you're a speaker and author in the field of governance and organizational culture. You're passionate about making the world a better place by improving the governance within organizations. And you're currently involved in research exploring the interconnectedness between organizational culture, ethical decision-making, and organizational performance. So I'm so excited you've told us about your product and your process and all that you do. So really, I'm looking forward to you sharing all this with our participants. So over to you. Thanks, Perrin.
Thank you so much, Lindy, and thank you, Carolyn, for this opportunity. In a moment, I'll endeavor to navigate Zoom and share my screen. But I thought it would be worth seeing the face of the human for a moment before I dived into a short presentation. I think Lindy's explanation of things that I've done, these things are always sound much grander when they're said out loud than when you actually do them. But thank you so much for that introduction. I think I would say that I'm certainly not a governance expert. I'm going to lay that out straight away. I've spent 20 years working in governance, but I don't necessarily think that makes me an expert. My academic background originated in the biological and psychological sciences of human beings. So that gives you some kind of indication of perhaps a theme that will run through the work that we do, and also this short presentation. So I'm going to try and share my screen and navigate. Hopefully I can do this business. And I'm hoping that works. Give me an indication that that's hopefully working. We should have a title screen. Brilliant. Look, here's a quote that I often reflect back on when I'm on the journey of research and discovery. And I don't know if you know the work of Dr. Pauline Boss, but she created the theme of ambiguous loss in the psychological sciences and grief. But she has this wonderful concept about, in order to move things forward, in order to make things better, we have to acknowledge that the truth might be currently outside of our understanding or even our conceptual framework. And perhaps some of what I'm going to talk about today might actually step outside your conceptual framework of what you perceive governance and corporate governance to be. But I think it's a great place to start. This is me. This is beautiful Guernsey, where I live. I'm just about to embark on a 15-kilometer run along the cliffs in Guernsey. And as you can imagine, it looks amazing, it looks incredible, it looks beautiful. But just like the journey of governance and research, once you start, the hills and the steps start appearing, and it gets ever so challenging at times. And I think it's really a great metaphor for a lot of the work that we do at CoSteer. I'm going to endeavor to hopefully just play a very short video, and I'm asking you the question here, what do you see? So think to yourself, what do you see? We could open it up to the chat, and maybe Linda, you can have a look and see what's coming up in the chat. But I often go into boardrooms, and the first thing I put on the screen is this. And you'll note that it's also the background to my my Zoom meeting wall. And this is obviously Starlings in Murmuration. And while you're thinking about words that you would use to describe it, I'll just tell you a couple of facts about murmuration. The only species on the planet that murmurate, and that's not actually a word, I just made that up, but the only animals that perform murmuration are indeed starlings. They do it for one principal purpose, and that's survival. And the reason that they don't all crash into each other whilst performing this beautiful spectacle is because they have a very simple set of rules, or indeed values, that they align to. So you can see the commonalities here between singularity of purpose and some core values that are adhered to in order to what I do. What I say to boardrooms is this is governance in action. So I think when I ask people, what do you see? These are often the words that I get: flexibility, agility, cohesion, collaboration, fluidity. It's magical, Perrin. It's magnificent. And one CEO turned around to me one time and he looked me square in the face and he said, "That's beautiful." And I looked back at him and I said, if I had walked in the room 5 minutes ago and said to you, governance is beautiful, you would have probably laughed me out the room. I said, but you've just described incredibly good governance in nature. So we've taken this metaphor as an organization and as a way in which we can approach the measurement of what we perceive governance to be. There's probably a couple of other things about governance that we need to know, or perhaps need to acknowledge at this point. It's shifting, it's moving. And we can see this, as I'll touch on in a moment, in the regulatory space, but also we can see that it's shifting and moving in terms of just our own understanding as governance professionals as to what we mean by the word governance. And the other thing that I really want us to look at today is that governance is complex. Now, I use that word very specifically because I don't mean that governance is complicated, although it is. I'm saying it's complex because it's an interconnected system. There are multiple interrelationships that are occurring in a system of governance. And unless we acknowledge its complexity, we can be very, let's say, we can be short in being able to measure it correctly. And I think this is our focus today. So I say governance is shifting. I think we are probably all happy to acknowledge that governance is shifting towards the acknowledgement that purpose sits at its center. The recent ISO publication of organizational governance firmly and circularly puts purpose at its core. And they're not the only ones. They have a definition of purpose that includes, of governance that includes purpose at its center. But this has been happening across time. This is not an event that happened only last year. We've seen this actually over the last decade, but most recently, the ISO, the US Business Roundtable, the FRC in the UK, all are beginning to talk about the fact that purpose and values and behaviors are really at the core of what good governance is about. Because this represents a challenge for us. Because codification does not map with symmetry against the idea that purpose, values, and behaviors are the influencers. So we've got a shift going on in the measurement of governance around the world, I believe. This is something from a UK report only recently, and it's suggesting that companies really need to give meaningful explanations as to how they achieve good governance. They've got to show the impact of good governance on the quality of decisions in their organization. And they've really got to get better at measuring and monitoring organizational culture. The trouble is it's easy to see this well-intentioned rhetoric and really not really know how and where to head to do good action. Because the problem is that most measures of governance focus on compliance. And it's embedded in our corporate codes: comply or explain. But of course, compliance is not governance. Compliance is something entirely different. And of course, what we've done within our research, within our codes, is we've drawn linear relationships. We've said improve board diversity and we improve the quality of decision-making. Split the chairman and CEO roles and you will remove conflicts of interest and therefore improve the quality again of decision-making. But I think we have to acknowledge that these relationships are simply not linear. They are interconnected relationships. And hence, if you look at the research out there, you will find a diversity of view. Some people will say, yes, diverse boards improves decision-making and corporate governance. Others will say the contrary. Some will say organizational culture affects the quality of operations and performance. Other studies will say no. Because I think we're looking for linear relationships inside a complex system. And as I've just said, they don't exist. So we simply need to enhance the way in which we measure governance. And this is being pushed by regulators around the world. And we need to move towards the concept of a more outcome focused, both in terms of our code. And I think I applaud King 4 in this, and indeed the ISO. But we also need to do that in our measurement. Because although there are statements being made by regulators such as good governance is aligned to a positive corporate culture, and we see much more constructive engagement in the culture discussion as a result, that's true. But we really need to get better at measuring governance. Governance is indeed a complex system, and it is indeed also, therefore, inherently very difficult to measure. And I've alluded to the fact that we like to move towards the easy, and therefore the easy is comply. Do we comply? Do we not comply? Let's create a framework where organizations can tick the box and say, yes, we do these things. But if there isn't a linear relationship, then a tick box compliance approach to measuring corporate governance is not going to be effective. So what's the other? The other is to approach governance as a complex system. And have we managed to do that? Well, there is a view out there that says no. We haven't really explored the concept of governance as a complex system. And certainly if you do a literature review, you will find a paucity of research out there that tries to draw the connection between governance as a complex system and the complexity science field. And there's probably a reason for that. And the next slide is probably going to scare the wits out of most of you in the governance and compliance world. Because if governance is a complex system, we've got to acknowledge two things. And I'm going to focus on the first paragraph of this slide. We have to acknowledge that therefore governance is unpredictable and uncontrollable. I'm just going to pause for a moment. If we acknowledge that governance is a complex, interconnected system, we also have to acknowledge that governance, therefore, is unpredictable and uncontrollable. I told you this would scare you. Because your job out there is to control and predict. That's what you do. I need to control, I need to predict, I need to provide information to my board that we comply or we explain. But if governance is a complex system, and we believe it is, and I think there's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that that's true, there is a huge amount of hope as well. And that's where the second paragraph goes. So if we accept that governance is indeed complex, usually the aim of science is to come about linear relationships. But if the relationships are not linear, we need to begin to understand what those interconnected relationships are. And this is complexity science. We're actually removing the need to control and predict, but enhancing our understanding of the dynamics in the system. What are the influences in our system, and do those influences change over time? I think most of us would agree, having worked in different organizations, that that's true. The influences in one organization may not be the influences in another. The maturity of an organization will affect the influences that exist. So beginning to move towards an understanding of a complex system of governance really begins to enhance what we can do for organizations. But we do have to first acknowledge that we cannot predict and we cannot control, but we can definitely influence. And this is what we've created. We've created an interconnected model of governance that acknowledges that there are probably 3 core elements to what practical operational governance looks like. The Latin root of governance comes from the concept of steering. Steering an organization, steering a group of humans requires decisions. And of course, once you've made a decision, you put that decision into action in order to move. That's the whole process of steering an organization, of leadership. But of course, there's a founding element that influences all the decisions that we make and all of the operational elements to our business, and that's culture. So we purposefully draw these 3 things as interconnected rings. And we make the statement that you simply cannot separate the culture of an organization from the quality of the decisions that you make, and you cannot separate the decision implementation strategy with the culture that exists. They are 3 interconnected elements. And our model drills down to 27 independent but interrelated indices. And our first journey of discovery during 2021 was to begin to understand how those things are interrelated. So our model is founded on connectedness. It's founded on the science of complexity. So we acknowledge that we cannot control and we cannot predict, but we can begin to understand the influences on organizational governance. We acknowledge that compliance is not binary. You cannot say we comply. I have sat on UK PLC board and said, no, we do not comply. But this is where we are on our journey towards compliance. So we don't consider compliance to be binary, we consider it to be a continuum. So the model that we've created and the interconnectedness that we have enables us to quantify levels of governance rather than state, a comply and explain. It's founded on collective. Now, there are many ways to measure organizational governance. One way is to go and interview your board, interview your executive, look at the similarities and the differences, maybe do a survey, and gather some really good information about the operational governance of those 2 groups of humans. Absolutely imperative. We're not trying to do that, and we make no apologies for that. But we ask everyone in your organization their views on the 27 indices that we measure. And we do that on 2 scales, a score scale and a confidence scale. And we do that purposefully, and I won't touch on that this time. Join us in September and you'll hear more about how we do this, but we use behavioral science to measure confidence. And we do this from the perspective of co-steering. So when we measure, we don't measure and instruct. We don't say, there's a linear relationship that exists between culture and decision-making. We've measured your culture. You need to do this, this, and this, and that will improve that. We don't believe that, because complexity science says that that doesn't really exist. But what we can do is we can steer with you, hence co-steering. So we steer with you on the journey. So these are the elements that we've centered our research, our instrument, and our model on. I'm just going to finish in a moment on 3 emerging data from our research already. Our instrument picks up sensitivity. So we've got quite considerable highs and quite considerable lows. So in organizational culture scores, from the 16,000 data points that we've collected so far, we're seeing organizations with quite highly organized and structured and high-performing cultures. And we've also seen organizations perhaps less so. We've said that purpose and values are core to organizational culture. This measure was asking organizations, when the values in your organizations are not being upheld by your behaviors, are you able to challenge that? In other words, we're beginning to touch on the concept that we talk about, psychological safety. Is it psychologically safe enough in your organization to say, hold on a second, this decision here is not in line with our values? You can begin to see the disparities that we're seeing across our data. I think some organizations are clearly more psychologically safe than others. And I'm going to finish with this slide. Interconnectedness is probably the running theme through what I've been speaking about. And what we've been doing is trying to utilize our data to try and begin to understand what are the influencing elements in the data set that we currently have. We measure 27. These are currently the 3 that are emerging as potentially the most influential. If you've got independent assessment going on internally and externally in your organization, and that's robust, we consider that a very strong influencer on your organizational governance. If your purpose and values are not being adhered to, and you've got a psychologically safe enough environment to challenge that, you're going to see good organizational governance. And if there's a high level of trust in the leadership, and I don't mean just senior leadership, I mean leadership across and through your organization, we see this as another key influencer on quality organizational governance. Thank you so much for listening to me over the last 20-25 minutes. I do hope that I have enabled you to open your mind to a slightly alternative, but nevertheless, I hope, incredibly exciting way of looking at organizational governance. This is also an invitation. We've got 30 minutes, I think, in a moment to sit and talk and chat and invite questions, and I'm really excited about that opportunity. But thank you, and this is a genuine invitation. We would love you and your organizations to be part of this research program. We genuinely want to grow collective wisdom around the interconnectedness between organizational governance, culture, purpose, values, leadership, communication. And we want to give you and your organizations the opportunity to see some insightful information on your own organizational governance. We're doing this absolutely collaboratively with GGA, so we are really excited to be able to launch this today. This isn't our first webinar. We're going to be doing another one in September. In that one, I'll be focusing a little bit more on the organizational culture element of what we do. And there's an opportunity at the end and afterwards for you to sign up to participate in the research. And then obviously, if you feel that this is useful, then obviously there is an opportunity to become a client of Coasteer. Next steps. I know that Divya is amongst us, my colleague. She's waiting for anyone who's immediately thinking, yes, we want to be involved. Please do feel free to email her. We'll do an initial enrollment process in collaboration with the GGA and the Good Governance Research Forum. And thank you, Lindy, for your support with that. And we will essentially take you through the process of assessment, and then we'll provide you with a high-level PDF summary of your organizational data, and maybe even the emerging influences that you might want to be focusing on as a consequence of our research. We obviously do charge for business services, but we don't charge for research. But we do have two wonderful charities that we support in Guernsey. So if you do participate, you will also get a little invitation and nudge to donate towards our charity. Thank you so much. I'm going to switch off the screen share in a moment, but please do, if you want, come along to our next webinar. We're going to be looking at organizational culture through the lens of understanding that human beings are immensely complex in our own right, but that it boils down to two very interesting concepts. And if you look at the research of human psychology, evolutionary psychology, the concepts of attachment and authenticity. That's really just to whet your appetite of what we're going to talk about in September. I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully we'll be back. Ah, Lindy, look, there you are. Good to see you again.
Yes. Wow, exciting indeed. I'm really curious about the 27 September event, bringing in the organizational culture, and all of this now makes sense now that I've heard about your psychology and human behavior background. So, wow. From my side, indeed, I have to quote Bella that said, "This is powerful indeed, and so relatable." I myself see myself as a bit of a corporate governance follower, specifically looking at reputation in that. And wow, what you're saying is just so exciting, and it really, indeed, the complexity and the interconnectedness is a big deal. So this tool and this instrument that you develop towards, like you said, more outcomes-based measurement and not only compliance is I think, groundbreaking work. So indeed, we invite all our our attendees today to participate in the research. So Perrin, if you don't mind, would you just, or Divya, just type your contact details again in the chat box. But everyone, please go to the GGA and GGRF, our research forum, the page website, where you'll see the event page and contact details, and where you can sign up to participate in the research. This is indeed exciting. Okay, so I think this is an ideal opportunity for us to open the floor for questions and answers. Perrin, I already have two typed questions, so I think let's start with those. I don't know if you can see them, from Bella and Bunyi. Bella asks, thinking operationally, what are 3 practical ways that leadership and boards can meaningfully humanize governance beyond compliance? So I think you know the answer there.
Yeah, thanks, Bella. Look, it's obviously, as governance professionals, the challenge for us is always to encourage boards to embrace governance as a concept that goes beyond compliance. And I think one of the ways that I've managed to do it in the past, I may come up with 3, let's see if we do, is to strongly draw the connection between governance and organizational performance. But of course, there is a challenge in that, because like all things in the literature, there's a diversity of opinion. But I think there is enough substantive evidence out there to point towards a strong connection between an organization that performs high levels of governance and organizational performance. So I think the compliance argument is obviously one of regulatory obligation. But I also think there's a strong argument that good organizational governance improves overall longevity of performance over time. And actually, there is evidence as well that it improves strategic implementation. So I think there's a number of areas that we can connect governance to performance. In terms of humanizing, I think this is a challenge. But I think some of the questions out there that we could ask our boards are, what are the largest costs to our business at this moment during a period of the Great Resignation? And I think the answer to that is clearly our humans. So is it not meaningful and indeed incredibly important for us to begin to understand the interconnection between how well we govern our organization and how well our humans embrace and walk with us on that journey of governance? So I think that the humanization of governance is already happening. If you look at the ISO, if you look at the ones I mentioned, Business Roundtable, if purpose and values and behaviors are considered to be the core of organizational governance, that's not about corporate codes, because purpose is about humanity, values are about humanity, behaviors are about humans. And therefore, understanding the humans in our organization is probably one of the most paramount things that leadership need to begin to work on incredibly hard. So I think practical ways, I would say, make strong connections between organizational governance and performance, make strong connections between governance and the influence that it can have on reducing human costs. So Great Resignation, and begin to emphasize how human beings are in essence what organizations are. Because if you take away the humans, you have no organization. So I think that's how I would do it. Maybe a bit of a cop out, the last one maybe, but there we go. Thanks, Bella.
Wow, true. Okay, I'll read the next question. Since governance is complex, who is in a better position to drive the organizational culture in the right direction or purpose? That's a tough one.
Yeah, thanks, Boone. Look, do you know what? It's a question I'm often asked. What's the target person in an organization that CoSteer would go towards? Are we drawn towards kind of HR, people, culture, or are we drawn towards kind of heads and of governance or chief compliance officers, or are we drawn to a CFO because we're looking at improving organizational performance and reducing cost? Are we going to the CEO because they're meant to be the person that most regulators will look to as driving culture? It's a fascinating question. I think in every organization it's probably different. Probably where the maturity of that organization is, the size of the organization, the structure of the organization, the influence that people in culture might have in some organization will be much reduced compared to others. I think the answer probably lies in looking at the board and saying to the leadership, whether it's a board or whether it's an executive or whether it's both, is when you look at your own priorities as a board, who owns this at the leadership level? Because actually in organizations, it can be different. I have been in organizations where actually culture is probably rightly maybe owned by the CEO. But obviously there are organizations where it's owned by people and culture, but they don't even sit on the board. So you have to say, well, yes, that's fine. It might sit with people and culture, but who here is taking accountability for that? So I think it's a discussion rather than an answer. Who is in the better position to drive organizational culture? I think the answer is everyone has to drive organizational culture. It's a collective board-driven agenda, and it has to be. Will you find that in most boards? Probably not. Does that need to be the case? I think yes. So I think that's how I would answer that question. Thank you.
And I guess also the challenge then to get it from board level to filter through to the organization as well.
And of course, it's interconnected. So being able to explain to people that, but there are 50 people in our organization. 30 decisions, key decisions are made by each employee every single day. That makes 500,000 decisions that are made in our organization every day. Culture is the driver of quality decisions in our organization. Who's responsible for culture? Because it's driving 500,000 decisions a year in our little 50-person organization. Who's responsible for that?
Wow. And again, that emphasizes the importance of the human factor, that indeed the organization is the people in it. Okay. So our next question from Glenn. I think, yeah, we can't talk about governance or any current issue without discussing sustainability and climate change, right? So he asks, how might your tool be used to resolve the cognitive dissonance with climate change?
Yeah, goodness me. Yeah, you're taking me slightly outside of my own comfort zone here. So thank you for that. But I will step willingly. Look, without question, I would say personally, and this is a personal opinion, climate change is the most imminent and most important challenge that we face at this moment. Now we're doing that as a global collective. One could argue through strategies with the acronym ESG. Now, whether we agree with the acronym, whether we want to put ESG as being more of a marketing and branding style excuse that a lot of companies are using. We do green funds. We're a green jurisdiction. We prioritize ESG within our organization. It's sadly, like many things, become something of a marketing exploitation exercise. But actually, if you get to the root of what it was originally trying to do, it was trying to bring together three key interconnected elements. Yeah, we've got the environmental catastrophe that we face. We've got the societal challenge of onboarding people on this journey. And how is it best to do that? Well, we need to govern. We need to bring people together as human beings, as a collective, and resolve these issues. Well, resolve is probably too strong a word, but at least begin to address. So can what we're doing play a role in that? I would love it to, of course. CoSteer has its own purpose as an organization, and that is to improve society by improving business. We think that by moving governance in the direction of purpose, values, culture, and humanization, we actually will bring and uplift the quality of leadership and organizational governance. And as a consequence, with businesses being completely interconnected with society, we will uplift the quality of society. Now, these are all interconnected drivers. So yeah, the next journey for us is probably looking at how we can integrate our understanding and our thinking into the collective of ESG space. We are already looking at that. We're looking at various collaborations with environmentally focused organizations, and we do think that there's a way of doing that and looking at this from a perspective of complexity. So thank you for your question. It probably doesn't answer it very well, but I've tried. Thank you.
I think you give a nice overview of where you're going and what direction you're moving in that sense. So yeah, thanks. And then a similar one in the sports arena. Fiona asks, how might this model fit with the Code of Sports Governance in the UK?
Okay, thank you, Fiona. I only very briefly touched on it in the presentation that I gave, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk a bit more about that in September, but you can also obviously contact us directly. What the model allows us to do, because it's not focused on one code, because it's focused on governance as a holistic, collective, interconnected model, and the indices that we measure are practical, So we're measuring purpose, we're measuring value, we're measuring communication quality, we're measuring information distribution, we're measuring key operational elements within a business. What we've been able to do is align our model and therefore the outcomes of that model to multiple corporate governance codes around the world. So yes, I put up a slide and it showed King 4, but if you want to align your model to the UK, we've done it. Guernsey, we've done it. Mauritius, we've done it. India, we've done it. UK Sports Governance Code, come see me. We'll do it.
Okay, that's promising. Thanks, Fiona. And then our next question by Francis. How would you appraise the composition of board to measure of culture?
Thanks, Francis. Okay, I'm going to take a bash at this on the basis of trying to understand the question. I understand the question of how would you appraise the composition of board to measure of culture. Board composition is something that I've got wonderful esteemed colleagues of mine that look at board composition, the diversity of it, the skill set frameworks. They create board appointment charters to look at making sure that they get the diversity that they need. There is considerable research out there that looks at the composition of boards and the effectiveness, therefore, on both in terms of governance and also obviously organizational performance. I made a point earlier that I hesitate because I don't believe that governance is a linear relationship. Do I think that the composition of boards and the diversity of boards has an impact on organizational governance? Yes, it's an influencer. But I don't think it's a linear relationship. I think there are multiple factors. I think that the culture within boards, and I'm trying to sort of envelop different aspects of your question here. I think the culture of boards can be hugely influenced by their composition. And I think one thing that I touched on just before we finished the presentation was the idea that culture really centers around two core things, attachment and authenticity. Now, I won't dive into that right at this moment, but I'll say one statement. It's a paradox, of course. We as human beings are innately bound to attach to other human beings. We do that because we survive. We survive in groups. But we often do that at the sacrifice of our authenticity. So we sacrifice authenticity in order to attach. So the composition of a board is fascinating, and the way that it operates is also fascinating. And we're actually in the process of devising an instrument that we think will measure essentially organizational, or what we will call organizational resilience. But essentially, it measures the levels of attachment and authenticity that are going on within your organization. And as a consequence, measures the resilience of that organization to deal with what I would call organizational events like mergers, acquisitions, change of CEO, strategic change, cultural change. These are events that organizations go through all the time. Can we measure the resilience of that organization to those events? I think you can. We need to use complexity to do it. We're in the process of devising an instrument to measure that. So yeah, we're on an exciting journey. I've probably not answered your question, but I think I've kind of tried to tackle it, Francis.
But definitely interesting, and I think you have answered. And I think this is such an important topic in South Africa. Board diversity, transformation, gender equality. It's so topical. It's so important, and it contributes so much to the balance of power in a board. And like you've said, that's what drives everything. So really interesting. Thanks. Okay, next question.
Oh, Lindy, we've just lost you for a minute.
Lindy, you
Oh,
unmute.
dear.
There we go.
I'm back. Apologies. So we've got King's question: comply or explain encourages an uncritical linear approach to governance practice. Would a measure linked to outcomes be more useful? I think that links to what you've also mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. I would absolutely say that, and I do this with the absolute acknowledgement to colleagues of mine who are in, you know, the space of creating codes of corporate governance in different jurisdictions, and I applaud them. You know, but of course, if we look at the reasons why that happens, if we look at a little bit about the history of law and regulation, you know, laws and regulations respond to the environment in which they exist. Laws and regulations didn't exist at the moment that we arrived on the earth. They created themselves. We created them as human beings in response to human behavior. So codes of corporate governance are a response to human behavior. So just like all laws and regulations, if you have poor behavior out there in the marketplace, then rules and regulations are purportedly required in order to contain us, in order to keep us in line. Now, of course, that's the reason we create policies, procedures, and controls in our organizations too. Of course, we create them in order to, let's say we actually create them in order to control human behavior. Because we think that if we didn't have policies, procedures, and controls in our organization, everyone would be unruly. Actually, that's not true. But we've got this reliance upon policies, procedures, and controls. Would a measure linked to outcomes be more useful? I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, absolutely. This is exactly the journey that we're on. The data that we collect not only center around human perception of 27 indices of governance in an organization, we also record business metrics. So we take organizational performance data at the time of these surveys. And what we're beginning to do is find patterns that exist between scores of culture, scores of decision making, and scores of what we call operational efficacy. And we can begin to draw relationships between uplifts in culture and organizational performance and or reductions in staff turnover. An incredibly vivid picture at the moment with the Great Resignation and the costs to businesses. So yes, I think a measure linked to outcomes is absolutely critical, and we believe that's what we're on the journey to creating, a truly complex view of governance connected to outcomes. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Okay, so next question from Tombi. What are the success factors to implementing the model, particularly in public sector environment, which is highly politicized and corruption is highly prevalent?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, then, Tombi. Look, I won't say that the organizations that have adopted what we do are organizations that are courageous, right? There are leadership that are willing to walk into a space of vulnerability, because there's no question that if you are asking an organization to measure itself and to ask all human beings in your organization to participate in that and to do it openly, then of course it's hugely courageous of leadership to do that. Of course, the survey instrument itself and the outcomes are all anonymous, but nevertheless, it takes huge courage from leadership to say, we want to see a picture of our organization that we've never seen before. So yes, I think it is a challenge, and I think adoption hasn't been, I wouldn't say it's been slow, but what I say is it's following the pattern of early adopters, followed by those that will follow, very lately followed by those that are unwilling to follow or adopt. So I think, yeah, you're going to see a staged process of adoption of such a model and assessment. But I think the power lies in the connection between saying, we can strategically assist you in focusing your resources on the key influencers on governance and performance. And I think that's the driver in the boardroom, is we're going to bring to you something that's going to probably reduce your spend, but increase the response to that spend. That's our boardroom banter, I suppose. What do we bring? That's what we bring. But yeah, public sector organizations, of course, it's a challenge in all jurisdictions. Yeah, thank you, Natombi.
A great question as well. Okay, we're almost out of time, but let's address a few more. So Bella asks, are companies getting more agile and less hierarchical? Or if so, what challenges and opportunities are there for governance?
Hi, Bella. It's an interesting question. I'm going to just pause a moment, because you mentioned the concept of agility. Now, agility is something that is quite often bandied around by organizations, and indeed by certain organizations as well, that purport to be able to measure agility of organizations. And I think it's a fascinating concept of whether organizations are indeed agile, and can you measure that agility? One thing that we do is we do actually endeavor to try and measure what we call 3 murmuration factors of an organization. There's cohesion, so the cohesiveness of your organization, the measure of collaboration, so how much collaboration is going across and through your organization, and we also measure agility. So are companies getting more agile and less hierarchical? Well, I would say some are, but I think some are probably moving in the other direction. And if so, what challenges and opportunities are there for governance? I think huge, because I think if you draw the metaphor that I did right at the beginning, there is a hugely powerful visual representation of governance in nature. And I say to leadership, would you not want your organization to be able to murmurate like starlings? And they're all going, yeah. And I'm going, well, then we need to be able to measure your organization in that way. And that's what we do as part of our technology, is we measure the agility, cohesiveness, and collaboration in organizations. Is it an opportunity for governance? Absolutely. It's right there. We've stepped into it. So yes, it is.
Wow. Okay,
we're out of time. Sorry, Lindy.
Yeah, Carolyn, please advise. I don't know if we can ask the last 2 questions, if Carolyn has time, or if you'd be interested in answering these people personally, directly, these questions.
I'm happy either way. But
have you got some time, Perrin?
I have time. Yes, I do.
Great. Okay, so if I can just wrap up and then you guys can carry on. Just to let everybody know, I have put in the chat function the link to the next event. The next event will happen at the same time on the 27th of September, but there's a bit of background. So, Perrin, maybe if you could just give us a little bit of insights in terms of what to make the next event more exciting, what you're going to give us, and you know, what you're going to provide us, and what we need to do to participate. Just to say that all the questions will be answered, and we'll keep recording and make it available on the event page and YouTube. So if you have to drop off, that's fine. If you want to still ask your questions, that's absolutely fine. Otherwise, the next event on the 27th of September. So, Perrin, if you can just give us a little bit of insight. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, absolutely. We're running our second in the series of these webinars on the 27th of September. We're going to focus a little bit more on organizational culture. And what we're going to do is we're going to run, if we can, Carolyn and I and Lindy are going to run essentially our technology, and we're going to run it for all participants. So what we're going to give you an opportunity to do is actually use our technology, and then we're going to present back some interesting data that will emerge from that technology. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to give you an example of an organization that we might all know or have some experience of. And we're going to ask for your perceptions of that organization, either through direct experience or observable experience. And then we're going to present back those data as being an illustration of the power of what we've got within our technology and what we're endeavoring to do. So there'll be a kind of a pre-practical element where you'll get the opportunity to participate using our technology and our instrument. And then there'll be an opportunity to look at those data in the webinar on the 27th of September. What I will also do, as I say, is I will dive a little bit deeper into what our growing understanding of organizational culture is, and the core elements of that culture as human beings, how we operate, how we interconnect with others, and the driving influences of those, which I mentioned before, attachment and authenticity. So I hope that's a taster to whet your appetite. There's going to be some practical experience. There's going to be some data to feedback, some discussion points to look at, and a deep dive into organizational culture, perhaps from a view you've never seen before.
Thank you, Perrin. And now, Lindy, over to you. I'm going to put my camera off, but I'll be in the background if there are any ISO 37000 kind of questions. But I will thank you very much for being online, Perrin. And Lindy, thank you for hosting. And I'll leave you to carry on asking and answering questions until you've had enough and until all of our participants have dropped off. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Thanks so much. So, Perrin, I'm going to continue with the questions if it's okay with you, and let us know when you've perhaps run out of time, and I'll let you know when the questions have stopped.
Okay.
Okay, so going back to the chat side, John asks, the problem with all standards and codes is the fact that they are drawn up by committees, and typically they are compromises, and although they're often a step in the right direction, they are not reflecting leading thought. I think that is true. So he's really just commenting, but I think that really strongly links to what you said earlier, that it should align to your purpose, and it keeps you honest as well. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think John, you're right. I think there is a problem with standards and codes, and I'd say equally there's the same challenge with internal policies, procedures, and controls. All right, they're all fairly rigid frameworks, but I do think that we can utilize them. I probably sound like I malign them too strongly, but I think they serve a purpose. But I think we really need to understand the limitation of that purpose. So that's why, when we went about our assessment and our measurement, we didn't disregard codes. In fact, we very much brought them in to the outcome. But that's why we don't look at them in a binary fashion. We don't say to an organization, you comply or explain. What we say is, this is where you are on your continuum. And we drill down into the principles of each of the codes that we've aligned against. So we can say, the quality of the executive is at a measure of around 60%. And what we can do is we can say, and these are the things that influence that. So you can actually begin to see, okay, well, we're scoring at 60. Last time we scored at 55. We're progressively moving towards a better outcome. So I think there are ways that we can utilize codes in a slightly more effective way. So there are problems with them, but I don't think we should disregard them. But I think we should encapsulate and encompass them from a different perspective. Hopefully that helps, John. Thank you. If you're still there, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may add, I think, codes still play an important role. If I think from a South African perspective, publicly listed companies have to comply with the King Code in South Africa. So you can't just disregard it. So to bring it into play in like you say, utilize it, optimize it for yourself to actually show the benefits, then there's real value in actual fact. Okay. So Vanessa asks, and that's one point I'm particularly interested in, you know, the carrot versus stick debate. Is there an observable point of diminishing returns in balancing governance and outcomes? Often the challenge to obtain buy-in to implement governance principles.
Thanks, Vanessa. Goodness me, I'm going to take just a moment to just absorb that question. Is there an observable point of diminishing returns in balancing governance and outcomes? I take from that, and apologies if I take it wrong, but I take from that that there might be a perception that by taking governance to the nth degree, that you end up diminishing its potential for an outcome. And I guess this kind of comes from a view that, you know, if we implement you know, governance to the nth degree, we actually end up restricting an organization. So, you know, governance as a compliance methodology obviously has the potential of being prohibitive to agility, innovation, creativity, the things that we want organizations to be. I don't share that view. Now, I can say I don't share that view because I think governance is ill-defined. And I don't mean that to disrespect all of my governance academic peers around the world, because I love some of them. But I do think that governance is ill-defined, which is why you won't see me put up in words a definition of governance, because I don't think there is one that really does it justice. So in answer to your question, I don't think there is, because I don't think governance and performance is a law of diminishing returns. I don't think you can ever have too much governance. Can you have too much compliance? I think we can probably agree that that's probably true. Can we have too many policies, too many procedures, too many controls? Yes, I think we can do, because I think that constrains us. So there is a law of diminishing returns when it comes to implementing policies, procedures, and controls to influence human behavior, because that's why they're there. But do I think there's a law of diminishing returns between outstanding, perfect governance and organizational performance? No, I don't, because I actually think that the complexity of the model of governance actually leads to simply just moving towards perfect performance. Does that ever exist? No, of course not. Does perfect governance ever exist? No, of course not. This is why comply and explain to me is not a route to go down, because if we say we fully comply, it means we're perfect. Well, that's just not meaningful, and we know that from a connection between corporate failure and the perfect annual report. You know, so yeah, I don't know that. I think that answers your question, Vanessa. I hope I've got it right. I don't think there's a law of diminishing returns, because I think that governance and performance are inextricably connected, and that better governance will always lead to better performance, because governance is not a compliance exercise.
Thanks. Before I return to the Q&A side, we have a related question from Refillware in the chat room box. In addition to Vanessa's question, with South Africa facing potential grey listing, I've had issues with impact funds which want to compromise on governance using impact as an excuse. What trends have you seen in impact investing in other jurisdictions?
Goodness me, what a fascinating question. And again, you're probably you're asking me to step well outside my comfort zone here, but I'll do my best. Okay. I have added impact funds which want to compromise on government. Okay, yeah. Look, the funds sector is interesting, of course, because it's getting an incredibly bad name through ESG because of greenwashing, and obviously, you know, it faces challenges, and in impact funds, impact investing obviously has if I've got got the definition that you're using right, it's obviously driving towards trying to make veritable and positive contributions to the ESG argument. And impact investing and impact funds are all about making a difference. And I think the problem lies here in the fact that we, again, and I'll come back to my answer that I said before, I think we've misunderstood what governance is. Governance is not compliance, but it's become compliance. And I think there's a re-education process. And I think, King 4 and other codes around the world that have emerged recently do support that shift. But I think we need to do a lot of work on education around the fact that governance is not about whether you have a risk committee. Governance is not about your remuneration policy. I'm not saying you don't need them, but that isn't governance. Governance is an interconnected relationship between how you're making good, ethical, quality decisions in your organization, how culture impacts that relationship, and when you've made your decisions, how you operationalize those decisions in your organization, and then how you have your feedback loops, your independent and external assessments of your own internal controls. It's an interconnected relationship. Governance is not, in my view, about controlling and predicting. And I think maybe that's where some of this problem lies, is the fact that governance is seen as an exercise which is arduous, because we have to do this in order to launch this fund. We have to do this in order to, comply with these regulations. But that, sadly, is so far away from what governance was originally all about. We have to go back. Governance is about the quality of steering. How well are we steering this organization? And how well is everyone in it steering with us? Go back to that metaphor of the starlings. That's what your organization should be able to do. It isn't going to do that under these frameworks. And I know that probably doesn't help you, but it is an argument that we have to begin to have openly. Governance is shifting, as I've said. It's moving. And the more people we have that talk about this, the better that we will get at moving ourselves away from the frameworks that exist and towards governance as a real performance enhancing aspect to our organizations. Thank you. Refilwe, is that right? I hope I pronounced it that right.
Excellent. That's so true. Okay, so back to our Q&A box. Thanks, Advocate Ntepe, for your patience. I hope you're still with us. He asks, national cultures have a way of influencing organizational cultures negatively. What's the best approach to align people towards an organization's culture while also embracing the positive elements of the nation's culture?
Yeah, wow, you're talking about another interconnected, complex system, and of course, a lot. There's tomes out there, isn't there, published on organizational culture, and indeed on national culture, and obviously you're talking about the interconnection between the two. Let me try and give something back to this. The best approach to align people towards an organization's culture is about clarity. It's about affording people the opportunity to make decisions which align with purpose and values, and not constrain them too much to policies, procedures, and controls. If you, and maybe I digress a little, but if you go into an organization that has tomes of policies, procedures, and controls, you'll struggle to find innovation and creativity, understandably. And of course, if you go into an organization that has few, you might have huge creativity, but you may have aspects of poor communication, and maybe not decisions being made in alignment with values, or there may be all sorts of variations going on. So in order to align people towards an organization's culture, you have to understand and you have to be clear about what that culture is. So there has to be a clarity of purpose. There has to be the opportunity for people to make decisions in line with that purpose. There has to be a clarity of the values. And there has to be a clarity of how the behaviors that are expected of people within that organization are aligned to those values. And that needs to be abundantly transparent. There needs to be absolutely no hidden or obstructive view of what behaviors are expected within this group of humans. And then, of course, leadership, and I mean this vertically and horizontally, but I do also focus on executive leadership. Leadership needs to live that. That needs to be lived every single day, with every single decision, with every single method of communication, with every single way of speaking to a colleague. It needs to be exhibited in your organization. So the best approach is to align people to an organization's culture, is make it abundantly clear, what is this culture and how do we live it? And I'll quote a person who some of you may have heard of, Seth Godin, who's a kind of, I guess, a guru, to quote one way of describing him. He describes culture as people like us do things like this, which begs two questions: who are people like us, and what do we do? And I think culture boils down to that. You ask a supplement to that question whilst also embracing positive elements of their nation's culture. Well, I think this is down to people deciding what are those positive elements, and how are we again going to embrace those in the values and behaviors and purpose of what we're trying to do as a group. And I will use, and I do use, group and organization interchangeably, because that's all an organization is. It's a group of humans gathered together around a core purpose. What's the purpose? And how are we going to do it? And those are the questions that need to be asked in an organization every day. What's our purpose? And are we steering towards that purpose effectively? I hope that answers some of that question. It's a great question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think, to add, if I may, likewise, the organization also then, in the opposite direction, influences national or at least societal cultures as well. And that speaks to governance, once again, the responsibility that an organization has towards the society as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Linda. Yeah.
Okay, then I think this might be our last question at the moment for now. Ben asks or says, I love the approach and the thinking behind it. I'm trying to apply to membership organizations, particularly ones that elect board and committee members. What advice would you give to help such organizations murmurate?
Wow, thanks, Ben. Okay. Membership organizations, I guess this is organizations that are kind of serving a clear purpose. So you're gathering memberships together. Maybe that purpose is both a kind of internal gathering of people, but it may or may not be for profit. So I'm kind of taking that to what you mean there. Well, I think that the governance of any group of human beings is probably universal in the respect that we're just dealing with a group of human beings. So what advice would I give to get such organizations to murmurate? I come back to the founding elements of our own model. Do people in that membership truly understand the purpose of that membership? Do they understand that? Do they understand that the decisions that they make within it and that others make within it are serving that purpose? If it doesn't serve the purpose, can they challenge that and do that in a safe environment? So when you've got your board and your committee, in that room, in that environment, whether it's physical or remote, is it safe to say, I'm sorry, Ben, I hear you. I don't know whether I agree with you, but could you explain to me a bit more, because maybe I'm not quite getting what you're saying. You know, we need to be able to challenge openly and in a psychologically safe environment. So how do we get organizations, groups of humans to murmurate? We need to create cultures where purpose and values and behaviors and leadership and ethics all come together. It's not easy. It's hard work. But I think if we can begin to measure it in the way that we're doing, I think we can really help. All right. This is about really helping organizations look at things differently. So thank you for your question. And I think it connects to one other thing I want to touch on, which I mentioned, which is ethics. We talk about ethics, and we connect behavior to ethics. But I think ethics is something that's truly connected to something that we also talk about, which is emotional intelligence. And I think there's a really interesting concept that's been talked about in some academic circles called ethical intelligence, which is a kind of an expansion of really what emotional intelligence is. So emotional intelligence is this concept that we understand our own emotions, we can be empathic and therefore compassionate towards others. And we do that, you know, in our relationships with work colleagues, with partners, etc. That's emotional intelligence. But ethical intelligence is actually applying that to our decision making. Right? So ethical intelligence takes our emotional intelligence and says, okay, I'm listening to this person in the boardroom. I'm able to bring myself towards them and see them. I'm being empathic, and I'm being compassionate because I'm now going to launch into an action that's acknowledging that empathy, that's acknowledging that seeing. I know Sawubona is an expression that a lot of you will obviously be aware of, and I'm very much aware of this idea of I see you, and by seeing you, I bring you into being, right? Well, I think ethical intelligence is a way of applying our own emotional intelligence into our decision making. So I don't know whether that helps Ben or others, but I think it's a way of drawing what we often talk about in organizations, you know, improving our emotional intelligence. Well, yes, that's important, but it's the application of that to our decision making. I hope that helps. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Wow, excellent. I think that once again brings the human factor into ethics and to governance and whatever we do. And it just shows us we cannot take that aspect, the human factor, out of anything that we do. So, wow. Okay, so Perrin, from my side, I don't see any questions here anymore, I think. But looking at how many members we still have, following participants we still have here, this is just so wonderful and it's so exciting. And thank you so much. I think I'm going to conclude and invite everyone to join us once again with our event on the 25th. From my side, Perrin, thank you so much. I think we've emphasized the human factor. And you as human, your enthusiasm as a person really is inspiring. So thanks for sharing all of that with us. Over to you, Carolyn. Thanks.
Sorry, on the 27th, and I'm just going to pop it in the chat here so everybody knows where to go. Of course, if you register on the Good Governance Academy, you'll to join the mailing list, then you'll get a notification of the next event. The video from the past event is available on the page. I'm just putting it in the chat here. So that's the registration for the next event. The video from today's event is on the event page now, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. And thank you so much, Perrin, and thank you, Lindy.